So welcome back, and here we are already, I guess, in the book of Habakkuk. Mentioned before the minor prophets. I love going through the minor prophets. There's 12 of them, and most of them are pretty short. That's why they're called the minor prophets. Really gives you a sense of making progress through them. I know last year when we went through the major prophets, I hate to say it like this, but sometimes they seem to drag. The Isaiah is very long, Jeremiah is long, Ezekiel's long, and we spend a lot of time in those books. And sometimes you don't feel like you're making much progress, and they're kind of repetitive sometimes. But we come to the minor prophets, and gosh, we go through them so quickly. We just finished Nahum, now we're in Habakkuk. Short book, only 3 chapters. We go to Zephaniah next, another short book. So we're going to be making some progress here. And we come to this book, Habakkuk, kind of an interesting book, maybe a startling book in some ways. We can label the book overall, Ask Me, I think is a good answer. Maybe we could also label it Ask Me, Worship Me. What we see here in Habakkuk chapter 1, I've labeled this Questioning God, because Habakkuk comes with a lot of questions. Now, if you're a Bible teacher or you've been in a Bible class or really any classroom, in any teaching environment, you'll know that there's sometimes people ask questions because they're really objecting to what you're saying. So they really are not looking for information as much as trying to poke holes in what you're saying by their questions. Other people ask questions because they want to give you a lecture. They want to take the opportunity to tell you what they think. But other times, people ask questions because they want some real information. They really have an honest question they don't understand. It's really an act of humility, and that's what we see here in Habakkuk. Habakkuk is asking some questions from real humility, I think, and God welcomes that. God will welcome those questions from people who are wanting to really understand and admit they don't get it. So that's what we see here in chapter 1. In fact, chapter 1 and 2, we're going to see this as well. But my outline for chapter 1 is basically the question is, why aren't you listening? Why aren't you acting? And then the answer, judgment is coming. So the situation here, want to remind ourselves of the historical situation, is that the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, better known as the Babylonians, are basically amassing at the border. They are getting ready to attack Judah and Jerusalem. Habakkuk is in that area of the country. He's in Jerusalem. He's in Judah. And he is surveying what's going on, and he's kind of pulling out his hair saying, Lord, why are you causing this to happen? Let's take a look at verse 2. How long, O Lord, will I call for help and you won't hear me? So why aren't you listening is the first question. It's as if God has his fingers stuck in his ears and he's ignoring Habakkuk. And Habakkuk is saying, look, I'm crying out to you. Look what's going on. Violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity, he says. Why do you cause me to look on wickedness? In other words, what's going on here, he's asking God is, Lord, why are you allowing this wickedness to go on in Jerusalem and Judea and not doing anything about it? Why aren't you listening? Why aren't you acting? Look at verse 4. The law is ignored. Justice is never upheld. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. So he's saying, why aren't you listening, Lord? Why aren't you doing something about this? Why aren't you acting? So beginning in verse 5, we see God's answer. This is really a grace that God's extending to Habakkuk and through Habakkuk to the nation. And also to Habakkuk, to us as well. You know, Romans 15:4 says that we are to read these things and learn from the past. Learn from the past. And so this is a lesson for us as well to see what's going on. And we'll see what kind of lesson we could get out of this for the church. So we see that verse 4, God says, look, right? Look among the nations. That's how he opens this. Be astonished, wonder, because I'm doing something in your days. You won't believe it. You're not going to believe what I'm doing even if I told you. And we're going to see that is in fact the case. What is it that God's doing? Look at verse 6. The Chaldeans are coming. I'm raising them up. The Chaldeans were the ruling class of Babylon. They were the decision makers, the leaders of the nation. God's saying, I'm raising these Chaldeans up. And they're not nice people. That's what he's saying here. That fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth, seize dwelling places which aren't theirs. They are dreaded and feared. And he goes on here to talk about their fierceness. They're out of control. Verse 10, they have no authority besides themselves. In other words, they don't have a law. They don't have Deuteronomy that governs their actions. They don't have any law besides what they want to do. What we would say today is if it feels good, do it. That's their law. That's what they pursue. And that's what they're doing. They're going to sweep through Judah. They're going to sweep through Jerusalem. Yet at the same time, they're going to be held accountable. We've seen this before. The sovereignty of God smashes right against the decision-making of man. Look at verse 11. It says, then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on, and they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God. So it's not as if God is going to use them and they run rampant and won't get punished. No, they're going to go way beyond what God desires them to do because they are sinful people making sinful decisions and sinful actions as only sinners. That's the only thing sinners can do. So God's going to use them on the one hand, but on the other hand, he's going to bring them judgment. We see this in Isaiah chapter 10 as well. Make a note and go back there because you'll see that God uses the Assyrian. The Assyrian doesn't even know that God is using them. Yet at the same time, God holds them accountable for the violence that they bring against his people. Well, this kind of revelation to Habakkuk just raises more questions in his mind. We see that in verse 12. He brings up, this is making his head hurt. And he's saying, wait a second. Lord, you are from everlasting. You are my Holy One. You're not going to let us die. You have made an everlasting covenant with us through the fathers, through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. You're going to fulfill your promises to them, so you're going to keep us alive. We all know that. But Lord, you have appointed them to judge. You're our rock. You've established them. You've established us. How does this work out, Lord? I know, and look at verse 13, I know your eyes are too pure to look on evil. I know that you can't look on wickedness with favor. So why do you look on with favor on these Chaldeans that are going to massacre your people? How can you do this, Lord? He's asking him, how can you do it? How can you do it? Seems like the cure is worse than the disease. How can you do this to those more righteous than they? Lord, we're better than them, so how can you use them to judge us? Well, God's going to answer that. He's going to make it clear that he can do that, and he is going to use them. And he says, the Chaldeans bring them up go back to verse 14. Why have you made men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things without a rule over them? The Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook and drag them away in their nets and gather them together in their fishing net. So it's like, Lord, why have you made people to be the targets of the Chaldeans? It's like we're a school of fish just waiting for them to throw their net over us and take us away. And that's the result of this. We see at the end of verse 14 through 15 and into 16, The result of this is that they are worshipers of war. They think that their war god is on their side, and they worship their nets. They worship their instruments of war. They worship these war gods that are leading them. So, Lord, how can you do this? How can you take these idolaters and encourage them in their idolatry by taking advantage and using them to chastise your people? Good question. That's a good question. So we're going to see Habakkuk, his response then, when God answers him in chapter 2 next time. God bless you, brothers and sisters.